Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2025, and today we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our questions that we answer here on Wednesday afternoon from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. If you subscribe to us through our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe, that's where you can scroll down and input your information, your institution, and your email address, and we'll get that to you. That comes out at 9 a.m. Eastern again on Monday morning. And that newsletter called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education News. And that's what we share with you each week in the newsletter. And the email version, I dropped a link to the most recent edition that will be covering the stories. Many of the stories that are in the newsletter, we're covering many of those through the questions we're answering today. And that's what we do each week is we look at the themes we see developing in the news stories of that week. And we cover social media news stories, AI, ed tech world, space, and those kind of stories, as well as what's happening in the United States, some of the big picture international education news stories that happen around enrollment, regarding visa policy, regarding new markets, whatever it might be, as well as a roundup and solutions to what's happening in our industry that can help potentially you improve your institution's international education strategy. And we also have a global roundup that we try and feature what's happening in the rest of the world, and that's an important piece. You know, we work in international education, and oftentimes we get so busy in our work focusing on what's going on our own institution and the politics that are at play at our institution, we often lose sight of what the impact of policies and student flows to other parts of the world. We oftentimes don't see everything else that's going on around us. So that global roundup really helps shine a light on what's working in other countries and how we might better advocate for change that better reflects what we want in the United States. So I've also dropped the LinkedIn version to our newsletter in the chat. And again, between both of those, the LinkedIn version comes out at 8:30 on Monday mornings Eastern Time, and the email version on at 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday mornings. We do go into, between the two of them, we have now well over 2,300 subscribers to the newsletter. So really excited that many international educators are getting our news each week as part of their international edification. So thanks again for all being a part of that. We're going to start with our first question of the week. And that is, what are the basics of institutional branding directed toward international students? And this is really at the heart of what we talk about regularly on the Roundup is, are you meeting students where they are? On the platforms that they're using, with the messaging that they need to hear, and the content that will keep them coming back for more and keep them engaged throughout that enrollment cycle. Because if all you do as an international admissions person is, because you're new and you don't know any better, is all you're able to do is replicate what you send to your domestic students, you send the same stuff to your international students, you're almost shooting yourself in the foot in the process, because so many of the messages that international students need to hear aren't included in what typically domestic students will receive. The messages can actually be counterproductive. I worked at a couple institutions when I started. They were sending FAFSA messages and financial aid messages to international students when they weren't eligible for that. It's just counterproductive and sends the wrong message and shows that you don't really know what you're talking about if you're sending those kind of messages to an audience that can't benefit from the content that you're sending. So, what are the basics? I know those are a couple of them. Make sure your messaging is on point. But the article that I'm referring to today is from a vendor that we haven't really talked about before, Fabric. I've never really heard of it before, but it's a UK-based company. But it does have, it makes it some excellent points in here. Title of the article is How University Branding for International Students Helps Institutions Stand Out Globally. And that's obviously what you're trying to do in terms of the messaging you put out to your international audiences. It's the piece here from Fabric covers a lot of different things. Why you need an international student recruitment strategy, using university branding to attract global students, creating a brand that resonates globally, crucial elements including effective messaging, compelling approach to storytelling, compelling visual identity for international audiences, so they see people like them, and a user-friendly website that's tailored to international audiences, as well as a strong and consistent social presence. So music to my ears as a social media and international education consultancy company that I started over almost 11 years ago now when I left Education USA after 6.5 years there as the marketing coordinator for the network. I saw the confluence of social media and international education and what social media is, and branding and marketing and online presence and having identity and website content that meets students where they are. These are all messages that when I started my company, I really felt as were at the heart of what we needed to be doing in international enrollment management. So much so that my job as a consultant has led me to work for a number of different institutions over the years. Most recently at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which I started as a consultant, moved to a full-time employee for 2.5 years, just recently left that position to work at the University of Akron, also fully remote from home in Ohio, only a 2-hour drive instead of a 4.5-hour plane ride, working for the University of Akron now, building a strategy, a recruitment strategy, partnership strategy to grow enrollment. And we're at the beginning stages of really putting in place the kinds of elements of a recruitment strategy that are going to be falling along many of these same lines here. But these are the core elements. We talk about these core elements in our six P's of strategic international enrollment management. And those 6 P's are foundational. They're principles on how institutions can really go about devising a strategy that includes elements that show that there's a global perspective, a local perspective on what's going on your campus, that you are including elements of planning and putting together data-informed strategies that help plan what makes sense for your institution, that you are using and connecting with the right partners and the right platforms, partners being Education USA, international schools, international institutions, agency partners, all sorts of partnerships that you could be including in your overall drive to become success. And not only external partners, but on-campus partners that can help build the long-term success for your institution internationally is based on how well you're taking care of your current students. So on-campus partners are key. But the platforms that you're identifying, and that's what this element, this article from Fabric really takes into account, is what presence you have digitally on your website, on social, that really connects with international students, having that content that connects. So the platforms you choose, what social media platforms, what college search sites you have profiles listed on, do you have that kind of presence on the right platforms where your students are spending their time, your future students are spending their time. And then you will look at people, the people that you work with, the peers that you're engaging with, that you include peers in your recruitment, that you include current international students in your recruitment of future international students, that you have the right content that meets students where they are through the personalization approach that you take by having native language content, by having language, major level content that's specific to them. We're in the process of, in the next few weeks, building international student communication plan and having segmented pieces for different countries and eventually different academic programs beyond what they typically get as an international or as a domestic student. So we're really putting in place the building blocks right now, and I'm really excited to be kind of in at the ground level. There's a baseline of students there. There's a good academic programs that we're going to be able to recruit for, but we don't really have a wellspring of content yet that we can be putting together to really drive what we want to do forward. So this article focuses on the branding of an institution, the global message that you have going out, what it might be for your institution domestically. Everybody has their unique selling points, the values that you have as an institution, but are those values domestically the same as what they are interpreted internationally? Or are there different takes on what your values are as an institution that you can massage and maybe reword internationally to make it more impactful? So these are the kind of questions that as institutions we need to be doing a thorough job and having specific international content that really meets students where they are and has the messaging that's right for them on the platforms that they're on, and using your current students to reach them and do it in a personalized way. And when you can do that effectively, it's going to raise your profile with those students and increase your chances of enrolling them, because it shows you're speaking their language figuratively and literally in some cases. So that's always a goal to be moving towards. So that focus on international or institutional branding, I certainly think is one that just because it plays well domestically doesn't mean it's going to play well internationally. So that's conversations that you need to start having with your university marketing communications teams to talk about how you position your institution. That comes from a digital presence, obviously, on your institutional page for international students, but also on what kind of content you're putting out globally. So that's where we are with the first question. So let's move on to a topic that is increasingly on the radar for universities and colleges around the world that have used agents to help recruit students to their institutions. Today we're talking about agent aggregators. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, agent aggregators are those kind of organizations that maybe had started out as agencies originally. Some have become have developed these networks of agents that report up through them. Some are pathway providers that have developed a network of educational agencies over the years to help recruit for their university partners. Some are ed tech companies that have become aggregators because of a service that they provide. There's kind of an online platform for college search, but also for agents to direct their students through the process of applying to universities in a variety of different countries. Now I'm going to throw out some names here for aggregators that you may or may not be familiar with, but there's Adventus, Applyboard, Shorelight, Into, LCI Group, Leverage.edu, KC Overseas, MSM. All of these are ones. Crizac is one I've never heard of. Defavo I've never heard of. Edvoy I've heard of but haven't worked with. Accelerate. There's a huge number of these that are out there that you may or may not know that you're already working with. The chances are that agencies that you might have under contract are also sub-agents for one or more of these agent aggregators. Now, if you're not familiar, excuse me, in the United States, we've done some surveys over the last decade or so. Not myself personally, but NACAC has done these. NAFSA has done some similar surveys of its members to ask how many institutions are using agencies, what percent, and then how many individual agencies do you have? And the average has been like somewhere in the mid to upper 30s, low 40s for U.S. universities that are using educational agents. It's a newer phenomenon, frankly, for most U.S. schools. Probably only in the last 10, 15 years have most institutions started thinking about it, if not implementing strategies around it. So with this report that I'm sharing with you from Agent B, it's not a watchdog necessarily, but it's certainly a group that you see oftentimes whenever agents are caught up in legal trouble. Agent B usually is one of those reporting on it. When some of the issues with some of these Canadian agencies that were funneling students that became caught up in these human trafficking rings that were just disappearing into the woodwork in Canada. Some of the ones when we had the Varsity Blues scandal in the United States. There was some international versions of that were going on. The fake universities with University of Farmington, University of North New Jersey, that Department of Homeland Security worked with. There were agencies, educational agencies that were caught up in those, and Agent B had reported on those before. But this particular one is their annual report for 2024 on agent aggregators. And the numbers here will boggle your mind if you're not familiar with the kinds of volumes that we're talking about here. The one in particular, the one that's head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of the number of agencies, is LCI Group. That's a Chinese-based organization that has over 15,000 subagents. 15,000 boggles the mind. The only other two that have ever gotten into 5 figures for agencies has been Apply Board. They were up to about 10,000 for a couple of years, and then they dropped back down to probably closer to 7,000 or so now. Another one has grown. Adventus has grown. You've seen Leverage EDU has grown. They're up to around 10,000 now. After LCI, they're probably the next largest group. So we have a lot of these agency aggregators. Agent aggregators have just incredible growth. In fact, the minimum number of agents that these aggregators have on this chart, and there's probably about a dozen that are on this chart. The minimum that they have is about 2,000. I think there's only one, and that was maybe 2 years ago. Then the lowest number is about 2,500. Now that for the numbers that have number of the agent aggregators that are on this list. So these agencies are dealing with aggregators are dealing with literally thousands of sub-agents that are working for them. Now, I will tell you this. I thought when I started a job about 8 years ago now, 7 years ago, 9 years ago now, this April, started a job where the previous director had been there for 30 plus years and had only ever worked with agents. And when I started there at this institution, I asked my staff, they sent me over the list of our current agents. And they said, well, it's really hard to say. It's not quite it's not a accurate list. And I go, well, just send it over to me. So got the list, and there were 2,500 agents on that list. And it blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that. When the average in the U.S. at that time was about 30. This institution had over 2,500 agents on the list. And it was basically, it's not in a database anywhere, it's just a spreadsheet, a running spreadsheet of new agreements that were signed from different speed dating of agent events that have been attended, and agreements signed. And agreements was a very loose word for what was actually happening. There weren't contracts even at that point. But I thought this can't be accurate. It's 2,500. 800 were from India alone. It was absolutely insane. But looking at that's the closest thing I've ever experienced to something like when I looked at this agent aggregator list, or this article that Agent B has put out. The numbers here are just mind-boggling in terms of the kind of volume that these agents work with. And anyone who's been to India for any fairs over the last few years, when if it's one of your agencies that is sponsoring the fair, there may be a number of U.S. reps attending, but the majority of the folks that are attending these are in-country reps for some of these aggregators directly, Shorelight, or partners of Shorelight, partners of Into, partners of Adventus or Applyboard. They would have their own staff that are represented there, and oftentimes the agencies that are participating in this, that just having those aggregators represented in the room is an indication that they work as agencies, that they might have their own network of subagents, but these larger agencies in India that put on these massive fairs have a number of agents that work for them. They will have several of the aggregators, if not there as themselves, representing Shorelight, representing Upgrad, representing Adventus, whatever, or Applyboard. They have representatives from those companies that are representing a range of different institutions, because those are maybe pathway providers or whatever the case may be. So there are oftentimes agencies that are working for 4 or 5 different agent aggregators. This happens not just in India, but in Nepal, in Vietnam, and a lot of the major South and East Asian markets. You're going to find this regularly. I saw that firsthand when I went to ICEF, Latin America agent meetings, workshops in Sao Paulo, Brazil, back in September of 2023. There was MSM was there, Applyboard was there, and then they were having meetings with the agencies trying to sign them up. And there's all sorts of challenges when you have these relationships that are so intertwined, and it's hard to, when you walk into any fair in India and you try and discern who's working for who, where. It's just an absolute web, and to try and unravel it all is just absolutely impossible to do. So the clarity for institutions related to aggregators it's clear as mud in terms of understanding the relationships and the challenges of working with some of these aggregators over others, the volumes that they're dealing with. All of that is just rather frightening, frankly, when you think about it. You look at some of the growth where this is happening. That you look at places like Career Mosaic, a partner I used to work with quite a bit in India when I was at UNLV. They have gone in a year from 2020, from where they were at the January 2024 to January 25. They've increased their network by over 1,400 sub-agents. They're up to 2,300. Career Mosaic, based in India, in Ahmedabad. But when I went there in September, August, I went to visit agencies in parts of India, in Nepal, and in Sri Lanka. Wanted to go to Bangladesh, but they were still having some major political revolution going on in the country, so couldn't get in there. Went to Sri Lanka instead. But Career Mosaic has expanded their network to agencies in those 3 countries that I know is a major part of their growth. There are all kinds of these agency partners, traditional agencies that have grown into aggregators over the last few years. GB as well. They're up to 3,500 sub-agents. So knowing that, these numbers can really just make your head spin, frankly, when you're trying to understand the significant change in that. In terms of what's happening to the market, and it changes so quickly, and that if you're not aware of some of these things, it can really catch you out. So the biggest one of these, as I mentioned earlier, is Leverage EDU. They increased from 2,000 to 10,000 in the course of a year. That's 400% growth, but the largest number of growth is from Leverage EDU. Edu Mandate, I've never heard of, increased from 300 to 2,500. That's the largest percentage growth. 733% growth in a year. So really some numbers that boggle the mind. And to think about how you manage all of those, you've seen some of these agencies that have become aggregators also run afoul of some of the ethical dilemmas of managing networks like this when you have so many. One of those was featured in an H&B story last year. I won't mention their name, but they're India-based. They had some of their sub-agents that got into some trouble, and that caused that particular agency to have their accreditation reviewed and examined by AIRC and some of the other agencies that accrediting bodies that work with them. So those are the kinds of things that make it for an institution looking at different aggregators and knowing the scale of the sub-agent networks that they're running. And for you as an institution trying to understand the quality issues, or the quality control issues of that they are having to deal with, let alone you dealing with 30 agencies that you contract with, but you're also contracting, when you're contracting with one of those that might be an aggregator, that could be opening up 2,000 other agents that they have to you, but they are also working with hundreds of other universities because they're trying to feed their beast of all these agencies, sub-agents that are working for them. So really it's a swamp, really trying to get into it and understand it all completely. No one, I think, really has a very good handle on how to navigate that well, but it is, you have to go in with it all with eyes open and understanding quality control, that in asking the right questions of these aggregators. How many sub-agents do you have? How do they work with you? How is the invoicing going? If it's all centralized, or do individual agencies, sub-agents work through you? Who handles that process? And the quality control, asking what quality control mechanisms they have in place on their end to make sure that the students that are vetted through these sub-agents are quality ones coming to your institution, or are they just, well, whoever comes, comes? Or is there any quality control? Is the kinds of questions you need and should be asking. So let's thank you, Dimitri, for getting on board, and your question on, did you ever come across exclusive contracts with agents and how agents can guarantee minimum number of students recruited? Oh my goodness, Dimitri, were you listening in on my phone calls this morning? We're having this conversation with an agent partner that I'm inheriting an agency network that a new institution has, and we're having conversations about expectations on numbers and how, though it's typically never written into contracts, the default for anybody, whether it's an agency, a future institutional partner that's really encouraging to work with, is they overpromise and underdeliver. And every service provider that I've ever worked with, typically, not all of them, 90% of them, typically will overpromise and underdeliver, and that's been a real disease in the ed tech arena in the last probably 10-15 years. All of these VC-funded startups for ed tech in the ed tech world, in the international ed tech world, come out, get all these massive rounds of funding because they have such a great concept, and the implementation of those ideas is always where the rubber hits the road, and oftentimes you get flat tires or shredded tires within a couple of years, and where they overpromise to their investors and underdeliver to their partners that they're signing up, and that means that they have to lay off staff, and this has happened. It happens every year. There's 1 or 2, 3, 4, half a dozen ed tech firms that downsize substantially. I know the pandemic, they saw a big rise in the number of staff that they were bringing on board because there were a lot of good people who left universities and colleges because of the pandemic. They were downsized out of jobs, and now those folks who went to the dark side, and I've been on the dark side, so I can say that they've 2 or 3 years later, after they joined these ed tech firms, they've been let go, and there are folks I know well and have become very good friends that used to be on the institutional side, that once they leave, they bounce around 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different service providers in the course of 5 or 7, 8 years, just because it's a cutthroat job world on that side, and the agencies are no exception to that. It's a business model that when you move up from agency to aggregator status, there's a whole different set of issues you need to be concerned with. And as institutions, you would love to be able to contract with people, and I'm half thinking about it with some of these folks that make these outlandish promises to generate students. That we might have a sliding scale on your commission rate now. How about that? We'll do our base rate for any student that you send in, but if you send us 10 students, we'll give you an extra bit of money. If you send us this many more, maybe we'll give you an extra bit more. So that's something that I would. I don't know if any general counsel offices would ever do that, but I certainly can see it happening because we had one agency that we had a particular relationship with. They had made promises to a department to enroll students, and saying maybe 100 will come, and we only have maybe 5 out of 100 instead of 100. So we'd be happy with 50 right now, because that department sets up expectations in terms of faculty that they're going to need to teach all these classes, extra classes, all of that. And then when that doesn't materialize, the institution looks like a fool. The people who sign the contract look a little bit, oh, what's going on here? So there's a lot of unmet expectations in the agency world on both sides, probably. But Dimitri, I like where you're going with your comments there, that changing your position, going back and forth. I've been doing this almost 32 years, and I've been 6 different institutions in the U.S. and the U.K., and I had my own consulting business, worked for Education USA for 6.5 years, so I know what it's like. I certainly get that. Fortunately, the last 11 years I've been able to do that from home, so that's been a big blessing for me and my family. But with these aggregators, it's a real challenge. So one that I always encourage folks to pay particular attention to when you're getting into these new relationships. Keep your eyes open, and if you don't know the right questions to ask, certainly ask colleagues who have been doing this a minute and find out from them what makes sense. What are the things to look out for? Let's move on to our last question, and that is, why should countries align national economic and international education strategies? And what I mean when I say align? Well, what I mean is that you have, as a country, you have different priorities. Certainly in the U.S., we have, anyone who's been in international ed in the U.S. Knows that we have 4, maybe 5 branches of government that each have their own missions that connect and overlap somewhat with international education. You've obviously got State Department, that their mission is public diplomacy and enhancing mutual understanding in the world. And that is, and when it comes to education, they want students to be foreign students today, world leaders tomorrow. And their goal is to always see these folks that we educate here in the U.S. return home and become leaders in their own country and take back their positive experiences back home and tell their countrymen how great the U.S. is. The Department of Homeland Security has a security first mentality. It's in their name, and they are responsible for who gets into the country. State Department gives the visas, but Homeland Security is the one who actually admits them physically into the U.S. So their concerns are security and intended purpose and all of these things that students, so their mission is not bring more students in. You have Department of Commerce through their U.S. Commercial Services has one of their main mandate. Their main mandate is promoting U.S. businesses abroad in the U.S. Commercial Services, and that U.S. colleges and universities are part of those businesses that they promote. And their goal is not necessarily mutual understanding. It's not necessarily security of the United States. It's bringing revenue into the United States as an export. Education is an export in the U.S. Then you have Department of Education that really doesn't do a whole lot with higher education other than funding through federal financial aid, which international students don't benefit from. But they have, so it affects, they have some Fulbright money, and they help send students abroad for study abroad from the U.S., but for internationals, they don't really have a huge impact on policy. And then you have Department of Labor that does have some post-study work after OPT, going into H-1B visa status. That transition is the Department of Labor is involved. So there's all of those agencies, departments, federal departments I've mentioned, have very different policies and mission directives that aren't coordinated at the White House level, at the national level. They all have maybe interagency working groups to tell each other what they're doing, but they don't really coordinate efforts around a central themed goal. We are behind the times in the US. We're behind even our Western allies, the UK, Australia, Canada, that have had policies, national policies that have been in some ways and forms supportive of international education. And actually promoting international education as a national policy directive. There are a series now, and I've talked about this in the newsletter several times, and there's a series of articles from Korea, from Malaysia, from Vietnam even, from, let's see, who else are we talking about here? We've got Hong Kong, Malaysia, Korea, and Vietnam, the four that I've dropped the links to in the chat. All four of those countries have, or in Hong Kong's case, SAR, have specific national policies that are aligning economic needs of a country with international education needs, that those two are actually connected, that by bringing in more students in areas that we don't have a domestic population that is currently able to fill those jobs in our country, that we need to grow our economy by bringing in skilled labor through our universities, who then encourage them to stay and work. You now are seeing those policies aligning in East Asia. As in some East Asian countries, they're doing it because they're aging populations. Japan, Korea, China, even to a lesser extent, and Taiwan. You see other countries in Southeast Asia that are growing themselves, but they're looking to become destinations for international students. And one of the things you do to encourage them to come is to say, give them scholarships and or work opportunity after they're done. So those countries, Vietnam, Thailand's doing it, Malaysia's doing it, Indonesia's doing it, Philippines are starting to get their act together as well. So you see that happening because the governments understand there are priorities, and they decide economic priorities to maintain their country's growth, and they're putting in place international education policies that support students coming to their countries and becoming employees after they're done with their degrees, and giving them eventually residency. So building in kind of what Canada did to the extreme, they're doing that as a directed and controlled way of growing their skilled labor force in those countries through international education. So that's why they should do that, because it helps the economy and the country grow. So that's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. Went a little bit long, but that's okay. Had a lot to say today. Some really juicy topics to sink your teeth into. So hopefully you enjoyed the content, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Midweek